Here's one of the most fascinating and potentially troubling questions in all of Star Trek fandom. What happens to people who use the transporter? If Dr. McCoy beams from the Enterprise to a planet, is the Dr. McCoy who materializes on the planet the same person who dematerialized on the ship a moment ago? Or did the Dr. McCoy who stepped onto the transporter pad die when the transporter was energized? Is Transporter Chief Kyle Star Trek's most prolific killer? I was going to devote this video to answering those questions, but after doing a bit of research, I discovered two things. First, lots of other folks have already explored the "does the transporter kill you" question in videos and written articles. And second, there doesn't seem to be a definitive answer to that question. Through 50 years of TV shows and movies, Star Trek's portrayal of how the transporter works has been very inconsistent. So that inconsistency will be my subject instead in this video, which I am still calling, "Is Star Trek's transporter actually a murder machine?" Because, it might be. There are two primary possibilities as I see it. Possibility number one, the transporter conducts you from point A to point B in a phase-shifted state. In Star Trek, phase shifting can allow phased objects to pass through unphased objects. So a person who has been phase shifted is still in one piece, just in a different state. When you arrive at your destination following transport, you are shifted back to your original state, the same person you were before you stepped on the transporter pad. Possibility two, the transporter disassembles you at point A and recreates you precisely right down to your memories at point B. So the you who arrives at the destination is not the you who stepped on the transporter, but essentially a duplicate of the previous you who thinks they are the exact same person, but aren't. Not that anyone except the now annihilated previous version of you would know the difference. There is evidence throughout the Star Trek TV series and films for both of those possibilities. In this video, I will be offering just a few examples of each because my purpose here is not to exhaustively document every reference to how the transporter supposedly works, but rather to illustrate how impossible it is, in my opinion, to settle on one of those possibilities to the exclusion of the other. Oh, and before I get too much further into this, there is a third possible answer. Possibility number three, who cares? The transporter is a made-up thing on a made-up show. It works however the characters on the show say it works. If it's inconsistent, that doesn't matter because it doesn't actually exist, and we're not supposed to think it does. And this is, I think, the proper answer. But it's also not a very fun place to start, so let's boldly set aside the wise advice of the Mystery Science Theater 3000 theme song to repeat to ourselves it's just a show, we should really just relax, and push on, full ahead. To me, the strongest evidence in support of possibility one is that this is clearly how the characters of Star Trek think it works. The transporter has been established as being safe. Generally. Remember that TNG episode where Barclay's like, "Hey, I have serious anxiety about using the transporter, by the way." And Geordi's like, "There have been like 2 transporter accidents in the last 10 years. It's super safe, so quit being such a goddamn baby. Sure, if you use it during an ion storm, it can send you to a parallel universe populated by evil versions of your friends, but hey, no technology is perfect, am I right?" That same episode, Realm of Fear, also demonstrates that people are conscious throughout the transporting process. Barclay is able to see and even interact with other beings in the transporter beam, who turn out to be crew members from another starship who had been trapped in their transporter. This consciousness during transport had been previously established in Star Trek II, where we see Captain Kirk and Lieutenant Savick conversing while being transported, and in an earlier TNG episode, Darmok, where we see Picard protesting as he's being beamed up. And there are other examples too, but those are the only ones I'm telling you about. Remaining conscious during transport is important because it means the journey from point A to point B in the transporter is an uninterrupted one. You don't lose consciousness or possibly die at the beginning and regain consciousness at the end. You're awake, experiencing the entire thing from start to finish, like a ride in a fancy glitter-filled turbo lift. A final bit of evidence for possibility number 1, whenever characters express misgivings about the transporter, they're always worried about the transporter malfunctioning in some way. Correct me if you know better. Actually, don't bother, I don't care. But I don't think there's ever been a Star Trek character who has objected to the transporter because they feel it's dangerous even when it's working properly. The transporter kills you every time you use it concern doesn't seem to exist for these characters. And yet, I find lots of evidence for possibility number 2. Let's start with that TNG episode I mentioned a minute ago, Realm of Fear. In the same scene where Geordi declares the transporter to be the safest way to travel, Barclay describes how freaked out he was when he learned that the transporter converts your body into data. This view of the transporter is also represented in the Deep Space Nine episode Our Man Bashir, where an explosion during transport forces Odo and Eddington to save the patterns of several crew members, inserting their physical patterns into the holosuite program Dr. Bashir is running and storing their neural information in the computer's memory. Eventually, they use another transporter to reincorporate the minds and bodies of their crewmates. And let's not forget the TNG episode Relics, where Scotty is able to survive for decades in a crashed ship by storing himself in the transporter. If the transporter converts you into digital information, which can then be saved in computer memory, allowing you to be retrieved decades later having not aged or experienced the passage of time, it's doing a lot more than moving you from point A to point B. But there's an even stronger piece of evidence for possibility number 2, and that is the transporter's repeatedly demonstrated ability to duplicate people. This was first seen in the original series episode The Enemy Within, where a transporter accident temporarily splits Captain Kirk into 2 people, a passive, weak version and an impulsive, amoral version that allowed William Shatner to throw down a gauntlet to every other ham actor who would ever walk onto a stage or step in front of a camera from that point on for all time. Remember this scene? Where id monster Kirk hears benign weakling Kirk making an announcement and he flips out, shrieking, "I'm Captain Kirk!" while alone in his cabin? I love that scene. I've even got a birthday card with a shot from that scene on it. See? Anyway, there's another episode that gives us an even better example of the transporter operating according to possibility number 2. It's a Next Generation episode titled Second Chances. In this episode, Commander Riker leads an away team to retrieve scientific data from an abandoned outpost he helped to evacuate 8 years ago, and is shocked to find that a duplicate of himself has been living there for the past 8 years. What? Back on the Enterprise, Geordi explains. See, the atmosphere on this planet generates a distortion field that makes it extremely difficult to travel through. When Riker was beaming up 8 years ago, the transporter operator used 2 transporter beams just to make sure Riker made it back to his ship. But it turned out the second beam wasn't necessary, so the transporter op shut it down. But the atmosphere of the planet reflected that extra beam back to the surface, which resulted in one Riker materializing on the ship, and, unbeknownst to anyone else until now, another Riker materializing back on the planet. The rest of the episode makes it very clear that both Rikers are the real Riker. There's not an original and a copy, there's just the Riker who made it off the planet and the Riker that didn't. The Riker who beamed down to the planet 8 years ago was split in 2 by the transporter, like a cell undergoing mitosis. And just as a parent cell ceases to exist, leaving behind only 2 daughter cells in its place, after this transporter incident, the original Riker ceased to exist, leaving behind only the 2 daughter Rikers? By the way, something's always bothered me about this episode. At some point, Lieutenant Riker reveals that he looked up the service record of Commander Riker, which includes being promoted for his heroic efforts in the evacuation of Nivala 4, the planet where Lieutenant Riker was trapped for 8 years. Which means that's his promotion. The only difference between Commander Riker and Lieutenant Riker is that one made it off the planet and the other didn't. Up until the moment of transport, they were the exact same person. So technically, Lieutenant Riker should have been promoted to Lieutenant Commander Riker as soon as he was rescued. Instead, look at this shit. He exits at the end of the episode, still a lieutenant. That is bullshit. No wonder he joined the Maquis. But I digress. I think that you can see my point. Is Star Trek's transporter actually a murder machine is a great jumping off point to have lots of fun, nerdy conversations about Star Trek, and who watching this video doesn't love those? But the question itself doesn't have a definitive answer. Does the transporter conduct you in a phased state, but essentially in one piece from point A to point B? Yes. Does the transporter kill you at point A, disassemble you, convert you into data, and then reassemble an exact duplicate of you at point B? Yes. How can both be true? Because none of it is real. And sometimes it's okay to sacrifice internal consistency for the sake of a good story. If the writers, directors, and producers of Star Trek, that is, the people who make it all up, don't care, then ultimately, neither should we. The transporter works however the characters say it works in a given episode. If Geordi and Chief O'Brien say that the transporter is safe, then it's safe. I mean, who would know better than those two? All the same, I think I'd rather take the shuttlecraft. Yo, Barkley, wait up. Why did I do that? That was silly. It's a picture. Can't hear me. Hey folks, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel. And also, please consider helping me to make more videos like this one by supporting this channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/SteveShives to become a patron of this channel. As little as $1 a month really helps me out with making all of the videos that I make on this channel, including this series, which I'm going to be paying a lot more attention to. So those of you watching, if you like this one, if you like the Captain Jellicoe one I did a little while ago, and you have any other ideas for Star Trek related subjects that you think would be a good fit for this series, underrated episodes, underappreciated characters, weird kind of kooky Star Trek related questions that you've always wondered about that you think would be good fodder for a show like this, please don't hesitate to let me know in the comments. Thanks again so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.